We're back in the smoke-filled room, and I thought I knew what our agenda was going to be this week, and then suddenly the state of Illinois and Chicago got sued by the federal government. So here we are, scrambling at the last second to make some adjustments to our agenda. The good news is we already had really good guests lined up, so we're good either way. Let me introduce our guests. First, let me say this. John Anthony was going to join us. His wife fell and broke her arm this morning, so prayers are with John, with your wife and your family. John's handling kid duty, so actually our prayers are with those kids who've got to deal with John all day. I hope they survive the day. But John said he'll be with us next week. So if you're joining us and you want to see John Anthony, make sure you join us next week. We may have somebody joining us soon who will hopefully fill that spot. In the meantime, I want to introduce our two guests who are here. We've got former State Representative Dan Caulkins. He was the rep for the 88th District. He also served on the Decatur City Council. He was an Army veteran, a longtime businessman, and like me, just a proud rabble-rouser. So Dan, it's always nice to have somebody on here who's going to join me in causing problems.
Thank you. It's great to be here now that I'm retired and on a fixed income. I appreciate this opportunity.
Well, it's either this or playing mahjong, right? So at least we're giving you something to fill the time. Though you just got back from a pretty fun trip, didn't you?
Yeah, we went down to Florida, to Tampa, to Gasparilla, which is Google it. It's a pirates fest in Tampa, and we had a great time.
Nice.
That explains the beard.
I want to see him in a
Do you have
peg
an eye
leg with a
patch
patch.
too?
Yeah, I had the hat, the beard, the sword.
Tell Lane, our producer, we got to send him a parrot too to get on his shoulder.
Yeah.
Now that you're no longer in office, you can take fun pictures like that, and they won't be used against you.
Well, that's not necessarily true. My friends, Michael, have taken advantage of some of the pictures.
There you go. We also have with us Zach Mottl. He's the president of Atlas Toolworks. He's also the chairman of the Coalition for a Prosperous America. He's held leadership positions in a number of pro-business, pro-manufacturing organizations. Also has been an elected official at the local level. Zach's done a lot for being a young dude. Zach, glad to have you.
Nice to be here, Collin.
I know you feel a little bit freed from the shackles too, not having to be in any sort of elected office. You can just do what you know is right, and nobody can cause you problems for it.
God bless those who are willing to serve, but it's not an easy job. And unfortunately, I think too often the ones who are serving are the ones who don't have anything else to do and they can take it. So anyway, God bless those good ones that do choose to serve.
We also have with us, as always, Core's political team. We've got Chris, we've got Michael. Some of you are happy about one, but not the other of those. But, hey, I'll let you guys guess which one I'm talking about.
Hey, good to be here as always.
As I look into the camera, I think I have less hair every week on the podcast.
We should actually do that. Lane, our producer, should just do a time lapse, 1 second for every episode. Be fun to see. As I mentioned in the intro, so we have had some big news hit just in the last, we're recording this on Thursday, and this just happened a little bit ago, so we got to talk about it. We're not going to pretend to have all the details on this, but it's certainly something worth talking about because immigration, I think, is going to be on our agenda every week at this point. But DC is coming after Illinois and Chicago. Not only did Pam Bondi, the new Attorney General, indicate earlier this week, that they were going to start withholding money from sanctuary cities, including Chicago. But now you have the Department of Justice is suing Illinois and the city of Chicago for our sanctuary status and for impeding immigration efforts. So I guess this was probably expected to some degree, but this is going to ratchet up the fight between Pritzker and Brandon Johnson and DC, all that much more. So I've got a lot more notes here, but I just want to open it up for anybody's hot takes since this is brand new to a lot of us over the last couple hours.
We knew it was coming. I mean, Trump had been talking about that on the campaign trail. Now it's another promise that he's striving to keep. And I saw a post from Blaine Wilhauer earlier today that he said that JB Pritzker and Brandon Johnson are in the find out phase right now, which is good. I mean, you see the rhetoric come from these guys and all the effort and energy they're putting into protecting people that are not only here illegally, but have committed serious crimes. I mean, look at what the statement that they put out a couple of weeks ago through IDOC, saying that they weren't going to, or reminding them that if they communicate with ICE, that there's going to be consequences at the state level. I mean, this is absurd. We've seen the headlines and some of the tragedies that have occurred in this state, and people that have no business being here, that are sex offenders and gang members and the like. They need to go. And hopefully this lawsuit produces a little change in behavior from uh, between Pritzker and Johnson.
I mean, obviously, I'm glad Michael's always hopeful, but we know that certainly won't be the case. But I love just reading the complaint from the DOJ. There's a paragraph in here that I think is just brilliant because they call out what you're talking about, Michael. I'll read it. It says, both the governor of Illinois, J.B. Pritzker, and mayor of Chicago, Brandon Johnson, sued here in their official capacities, profess a shared interest with the federal government in enforcing immigration laws to effectuate the removal of such offenders from the United States. They go on to quote Pritzker when he says that violent criminals who are convicted and undocumented, we don't want them in the state, we don't want them in the country, we hope they get deported. They quote him right here and they give the link right in the DOJ complaint. And this is what we've been calling out Pritzker and the Democrats for. They've been talking out of both sides of their mouth, saying we don't want criminal non-citizens here in the state, and yet impeding the federal government when they try to get those people out of the state and out of this country. And so the DOJ, they quote those quotes and then call them out for it, and then specifically list the laws and actions that are stopping them from being able to do their jobs. So now, is it going to change anything? I mean, Michael Pritzker's quote from today proves this isn't going to change anything because yet again, he speaks out of both sides of his mouth, where he talks about how, our laws are compliant with federal laws, and we still enable state law enforcement to assist with arresting violent criminals. It's a complete lie. Obviously, the Chicago media is not going to call him out for it, but I'm glad the DOJ will.
Well, I don't want to be in the business of like giving advice to Brandon Johnson, but we saw this week that there was a new poll that came out. His approval rating is 14%. And maybe if he wants to do something about getting that approval rating a little higher, he should cooperate with ICE because I think that would go a long way.
So Collin, let's take a little poll, a quick survey. Everybody here who thinks challenging the federal government over immigration, which has already been determined under the previous administration, the court said it is the purview of the federal government, not the state of Texas, not the state of Arizona. But if you think it's a great idea, and all of us on the panel and all the people that are watching, raise your hand if you think it's a good idea to challenge the federal government on an immigration policy. Come on, none of you, how about out there and the people watching? If you think that's a great idea, I have a bridge for you right here in Decatur. This isn't going to end well. And if J.B. Pritzker takes Kwame Raoul as his legal advisor, he's sunk. He needs to get outside counsel.
Well, I mean, it was a month or two ago, I think we talked about this, that the losers in this whole thing, I mean, Pritzker's going to gain popularity with the Democratic base. So he'll fight this. Kwame Raoul wants to be famous. He thinks he's the next Obama, so he'll fight this. But the reality is, it's the people of Illinois, the people of Chicago, who are going to be hurt by this. Just like, I mean, we've shared stories over the last few weeks. The young woman who was killed, two young women that were killed by someone who was here illegally, who hit and run in Urbana. And no, Michael, you flagged that Pritzker's refusing to call that person, and no elected official has ever called their family to apologize. I mean, these are the people. It's Illinois citizens that are being hurt by the political games that Pritzker and Johnson want to play and Raoul want to play, all because, again, they want to be famous and Pritzker wants to be president.
The stubborn morons within the Democratic Party, they had an opportunity here after Trump was elected and they lost. And they were able to lick their wounds and see why they lost. Now, an intelligent party would look at this situation from a governmental perspective and say, okay, let's come to the table, let's cut a deal. We'll give you free reign for the violent criminals, load them up, ship them wherever back they came from, comply with the federal law, and then we can go back to tearing each other apart on every other political issue. However, the stubborn morons see a political opportunity here. What they see is the ability to basically blame, because this isn't going to end here. They're going to be able to blame Trump for any problem that comes across the state of Illinois over the next 2 to 4 years, because we're talking about, federal grants being cut off, federal money being cut off because of the state sanctuary state policy. Thank you, Bruce Rauner. We're talking about all these things. So every time there's a problem in the state of Illinois, the Democrats can just say, well, it's not our fault. You should go look at Trump. He cut off our federal dollars because we're Democrats in this state. He's playing both sides. So, from a political perspective, it's not the worst idea in the short term. But in the long term, are you really going to die on the hill of not complying with basic federal immigration law, and you're going to lose all this grant money for your state? You're going to lose a lot of advantages that your state could have because you're not complying with federal law. Are you really going to go down that path? Right now, it seems like the Democratic Party's answer to that question is yes, when most of the voters would much appreciate a more middle of the road approach to immigration reform. But because both parties are so extreme on the issue, for one reason or another, it's never going to happen.
Well, and as you said, Chris, we've reported on two different polls taken in the last couple of weeks, where in last week's poll that we reported, 87% of the American public agrees that non-citizens who are here, who commit crimes, they've lost their right to be here, it's time to go. Even 40% of that 87 don't necessarily agree with deporting all illegal immigrants. They only agree with criminal illegal immigrants. That's 40%. That's almost half of that subset. And so you see how this specific portion of this issue is a winning issue. And you're right. I mean, Democrats seem like they're going to die on this hill. It's fairly short-sighted, to say the least.
Well, we're seeing this on this issue and other issues that the Trump administration is dealing with right now. Like you said, the polling shows that this is an 80-20 issue, right? 80% of Americans, more than 80% of Americans believe that these individuals should be deported. And Pritzker and these high-profile Democrats are siding with the 13% that don't think that they should be deported. I mean, go for it, I guess, if you think that's smart political strategy, but I don't think it is.
Yeah, well, I always say, strategize for your opponent being smart, and then smile and wave as they're stupid. And this is one of the smile and wave moments. It's just, all right. What is that, Madagascar, right? Smile and wave, boys. Smile and wave.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Brandon Johnson's going to be in Congress to testify along with some of the other blue city mayors in March. So this situation is going to be fun, and I'm sure we're going to have lots of future topics to cover for SFRs in the near future. Let's move to our next topic in this week's agenda. So Zach is here for a number of reasons, but one of the main reasons Zach is here is he's an expert on a number of business-related, manufacturing-related topics, both in his private sector business, but also in his position with CPA. And so, Zach, I want to toss it to you just right away here on tariffs. We hear all the time, both the pros and the cons of tariffs. Obviously, our party, I speak for myself as a Republican, our party has morphed on this from the free trade party to the fair trade party, and some of us have watched that evolution happen. There are still some people who are sort of like, hey, no, we're the free trade party. Then you've got Pritzker and the Democrats, of course, who hate anything Trump does, trying to make sure this looks like the end of all things if this actually were to go through. Help us level set here. What is the point of this, and what is this intended to benefit or help?
Yeah, well, so tariffs are actually a really good strategy despite all of the noise. And in fact, they were the strategy that we used to grow America for up until the early 1900s. This is what created wealth and created the Industrial Revolution, made us a strong, safe, and prosperous country. And, every single one of our trading partners around us uses tariffs. India, the EU, Germany has VAT taxes and tariffs, Taiwan, China, Japan, South Korea. Every single one of these countries has higher tariffs, by far higher tariffs than we do. And, people have a lot of hair on fire about what it's going to do to our economy. But I just point to those other economies. They've grown successfully in the same 30-year period that we have essentially stagnated, and quite frankly, 50-year period. Individuals' wages have really, the working class, right, has been stagnant since the 70s. Their wages haven't kept up with costs. We see the wealth polarization, right? It's gotten worse in the last 30 years. And so it's really at the base of it is a lack of a hollowing out of our manufacturing base, and quite frankly, our agriculture base too. We have a trade deficit in agriculture in every single category except 3 of them. So we can get into a little bit more. I'll pause there if you want to ask, but I can go obviously a lot deeper.
Well, let's talk there about the ag community. The Illinois Farm Bureau president came out and it wasn't an overly negative comment, but did comment opposing this and saying that it's going to lead to the retaliatory tariffs, and this is all a problem. Again, it was a decently level-headed quote, but still did oppose this, but said, they were thankful for the 30-day reprieve. So you mentioned ag. I mean, what have you seen and how this might benefit the agricultural community?
Well, I'm going to give you a little bit of data here. So from 1987 to 2012, the share of small farms in the U.S. agricultural
So Zach's internet is messing with him. He made a joke to me over text that the Chinese government doesn't want him talking about tariffs, so they've kicked him off of our Zoom. So Zach always has a good sense of humor. I love it. So as he's working to get back on, I want to open up to you three. What do you guys think about the whole tariff situation?
I mean, I think we've seen Trump use these in the past as leverage to kind of get what he wants. I mean, we saw it with Canada, we saw it with Mexico, where, he threatened tariffs, gave a date when those were going to start, and then Canada and Mexico were like, "Oh yeah, we'll help you deal with the fentanyl issue, no problem." So I think there's a lot of times we see people get their hair on fire, especially in the media, about the possibility of these tariffs happening. But at the end of the day, Trump seems to generally get what he wants.
Yeah, I mean, certainly it's clear part of this is a negotiating tactic, but seems like anytime Trump sneezes, there's 600 headlines based on the sneeze, and no one takes a second to see how things might play out.
At one point, the Democratic Party was the party of fair trade in this country, going back to the 90s. Obviously, Bill Clinton, the Democratic establishment weren't, but neither was the Republican establishment for that matter. So the loudest voices of American protectionism and economic nationalism came from the Democratic Party. Well, that's gone now. And a lot of that has to do with a couple things. One has to do with the fact that the Democratic Party's power base is now increasingly wealthy rather than working class. The wealthiest Americans, they don't really care. They don't want tariffs because it affects their businesses, their imports. They want cheaper labor from overseas. They want manufacturing jobs overseas. It also just has to do with the orange man bad phenomenon. Like if Joe Biden, and Joe Biden did do this, if Joe Biden did implement tariffs on foreign goods, it was a good thing. Look how good of a job the Democrats are doing keeping jobs in America. But when Trump starts doing it, it's a bad thing. It's a product of polarization. It's a product of, just the national political environment. And I think there could be room in both parties for increasingly economic nationalist ideas where we're going to have American manufacturing, American workers of all backgrounds, colors, and creeds, producing American manufacturing. That's the ideal scenario here. But the Democratic Party right now, they don't want to hear that. They just want to hear that the orange guy is a bad guy and that he's going to drive up your cost of goods, even though none of these tariffs have really been implemented yet. It's really just been a negotiating tactic up until this point, and it's worked.
Well, I think we can all agree. I mean, there's a difference between tariffs on China and making sure that we've got fair trade with, a country that clearly does not have our best interests at heart. And then you're talking about in a different category, tariffs and maybe, Mexico, Canada. There's different aspects to what is a pretty complicated issue, but people are trying to oversimplify it. And I did have some questions, and as Zach comes back, I'll, have a chance to ask him here. Good to have you, Zach. I had
Sorry
questions
about that.
I made a joke about how China's trying to keep you from being able to talk about tariffs. So
They are. They would like me to be quiet.
What's the difference here between, tariffs on China, as I said, a country that doesn't have our best interests at heart, and maybe tariffs on Mexico and Canada, who are certainly better trading partners for us?
That's a great question. And a lot of people get confused by that issue. Look, there's a couple of reasons to use tariffs. One of them being leverage, and we saw President Trump effectively use them for leverage with Canada and Mexico this week. Another reason is to protect certain industries, right? Maybe we have strategic industries that we want to have here, and so we want to do that. The third reason is to balance trade, right? We've been in persistent trade deficits for decades, and I know some people don't think that's a problem, but it's a huge problem. We're running down our wealth battery, and we're losing our middle class, and there's a lot of people whose wages are stagnant. And then the fourth reason is revenue. Right. And President Trump has talked a lot about revenue and tariff revenue, and he's got a lot of spending promises, too, and a lot of tax cut promises. And he's going to need a revenue source to help fund those things. So I fully expect that we're going to see President Trump deploy the full panoply of tariffs here. We're going to see all of those uses, universal tariff, perhaps 10 or 20% on everybody. And it's not about friend or foe. It's about us. Right. Did you ever break up with somebody? It's not about you. It's about me. Right. And that's what this is. It's about we've made a choice to have these jobs here, to have manufacturing, to have a growing middle class. And so friend or foe, you're nice people, Canada, you're nice, Mexico, but and every other trading partner. But what we've really done over the past 30 years is use bad economics and bad policy to give away our jobs to try to buy friends and peace. And it's really not working for America. It's running down our battery and our wealth generation.
And Zach, you've run a successful manufacturing business. I know talking to a lot of manufacturers, one of their challenges is they've got to play on a global marketplace. And when they do so, they have to deal with some of these countries that put their thumb on the scale, who, artificially keep their costs down. And so you're competing with these other countries where you're not on an even playing field. Does that come into play here at all as well?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. That's what this is about, leveling the playing field. And look, the United States is the biggest, most robust marketplace in the world. It's the one that everyone wants to sell to. Every other country has implemented mercantilist policies of currency manipulation, other ways of subsidizing manufacturing, low-cost power, land, etc., and with the goal of selling into the U.S. marketplace, the wealthy marketplace. You can literally take the rest of the world and just forget about it, right? We have a whole fleet of people. DOJ should get at this. There's a whole export department at the Department of Commerce, a whole floor of people running around about exports, but in every single category, imports exceed exports on net, right? They like to talk about airplanes. Look, those things sell themselves. They don't really battle it out for a nickel on the airplane, right? It's about the technology and the safety and the reputation of the aircraft manufacturer. We can talk a whole nother segment on that. But we don't need people to promote these exports, right? We need to sell more to ourselves and become more wealthy by selling more to ourselves. And economic history proves, both recent and past, you can go all the way back to the Medici family in Italy. They were mercantilist and they had protectionism, right? The United States was founded on protectionism, on high tariffs. We didn't get the income tax until the early 1900s, and it was a huge mistake. So what tariffs do is they allow you to protect industry and have a healthy market. A lot of people are worried about cost inputs or cost increases. So, for example, a 10% tariff, what that does is maybe filter, when it goes all the way down through all the levels of distribution and different people who handle a product, maybe 10% flows down to 1.5% to 1% to the end user. So it really doesn't raise prices. It's not inflationary because it's a one-time price increase. And what it does is it increases the sources of supply. So, for example, I buy steel and aluminum in my company. They've been tariffed since the first Trump administration. They went up when tariffs went on initially, and then they went up further during the pandemic when there were shortages, right? And that's what inflation is. It's too much money chasing too few goods. So we increased the sources of supply, and that's what happened in steel and aluminum. More jobs were created, thousands of jobs, billions of dollars of investment in those industries, and my prices have come back down to where they were before the tariffs went on. So that's a recent example. Same thing with solar panels. They've been tariffed. The prices are coming down on the panels. They did not go up. So all of these other, it's just really noise out there. It's really nonsense and noise about tariffs are going to raise prices. What they do is they create good jobs. And the whole point is to grow the wages for a wide swath of America, the middle class, faster than we're growing their costs. And that hasn't happened since the early 70s.
And our audience hates it when I get into policy like this, but if we're not giving you information, what are we doing here? So two more quick questions. I rarely get policy experts like you, Zach. So two more quick questions. One is this. I mean, one thing that seems to be lost in this debate is there are goods that are not having tariffs being put on them, i.e. goods produced here in America. I mean, that seems to be the thing that's missed by all of this is if you're worried about the certain goods are going to go up in price, well, then buying American seems to be to avoid that problem, right? I mean, that's kind of missed by this? We're encouraging manufacturing in America. We're encouraging you to produce and buy in America. That whole part of this whole debate is conveniently ignored by its opponents.
Well, that's the whole point. It's not being ignored by me or President Trump or the people who understand tariffs. That is the whole point of it. If you want to avoid the tariffs, make it here. Make it here, and you won't have tariff. You won't have uncertainty. You won't have any problems. And plus, look, we saw what happened in the pandemic. Certain countries stopped shipping us masks. Other countries stopped shipping us medicines. Do we want to wait for the next emergency? I mean, we need to be self-reliant. There is more than price to value, right? There's the good jobs and there's the national security and the ability to be self-reliant. So when we talk about medicines, pills, telecom equipment, all these things, it's not the price that's the problem. We need to look at the whole value proposition.
There's a national security aspect to this. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think none of us are qualified to, I mean, maybe Dan having served in the military, but for the rest of us, I don't have enough dirt under my fingernails to talk about that topic. Last thing here, Zach, you and I have talked about de minimis, and it really, I think because most people don't understand it, it just doesn't get talked about. But an aspect of this is that de minimis has been canceled is one of the aspects of this. And I know you and I have spoken about how not only is this how some of these countries like China dump their cheap stuff on us via places like Temu, but it's also where drugs are sent into this country and things are sent in that shouldn't be sent in. We have in this country, Lane's going to bring up in post, for those of you who are watching this, an infographic that's going to show every country and what their de minimis level is. The US is $800 or less. It can come in duty free. We're one of the few countries in the whole world that are at that level. Most countries, most of Europe is $200 or less. Most of our major trade partners are $100 or less. We've been at $800 or less. That's a huge loophole that many countries have been taking advantage of for a very long time. Zach,
I think China's at $8, right? I think Lane, pull it up. I think they're at $8. It's like, this is ridiculous. It's not even reciprocal. De minimis is a huge problem, and it's really grown with the Temu, the Amazon, the everything. They've built a whole business model around this. And look, when there are certain people on one side of the aisle who are worried about, actually on both sides of the aisle, we all care about human beings, I think, at the root of it all. But, when you've got China using slave labor and children, the Uyghurs, what's going on in Shenzhen to make the clothes that you're buying for pennies or dollars or whatever, and they're shipping directly from China to your door. I mean, that's disgusting, right? It's not even good on the slave labor, but de minimis, it's become the fentanyl highway too. Besides the southern border, these drugs are shipped in, counterfeit products. What people don't realize is there are billions of dollars every day coming in through de minimis, not inspected whatsoever. If they declare it's under $800, it comes right on through. Now, you mentioned it was canceled. Well, it was kind of canceled for China, but not for everybody else. And so we really need to get on the rest of it, because what China has always done, what they prove they're doing, and this is what they're doing through Mexico and Canada too, through USMCA, they transship stuff, right? So and they're fraudsters, right? They change the paperwork, they change the labels. Oh, this is made in Vietnam. Garbage. It's made in China, and they just changed the paperwork. They transship through Vietnam, through Mexico, and through the southern border. So we're having problems all around. China is the big gorilla in the room, but these other trading partners, if they want to be part of this, they need to step up. They need to be participants in blocking China from this. But yeah, de minimis, a huge problem. So I hope President Trump will do more on it. It's a good first start, and Congress can certainly step up and do their job too.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I've looked at the quotes from politicians on both the left and the right, all claiming de minimis is a problem, yet they just, for years, have done nothing about it. So at least this is a good first step. All right, enough policy talk from me and Zach as we put our audience to sleep. Chris, Dan, Michael, any other thoughts on tariffs, especially the political realities here before we move on?
Well, I think one of the things that we don't focus on enough is that the imbalance of trade allows these countries, particularly China, to go around the world and spread their government, their policies, their communism. I mean, we're looking at it in Panama. Where'd they get the money to buy these ports and build these ports? Where did all that come from? Well, it came from the imbalance of trade. They've got our dollars, and they're using our money to go around the world and disrupt a world order. And I think that these tariffs will help. I think it will certainly help. And I agree, Zach. There's an economic policy here, but there's also, I think, a stability, a world trade policy, and we need to be just as tough on them as they are on us.
All right, this has been a good discussion. Thanks, guys. Let's move on to our next topic here. And we're going to talk about the Illinois budget, something we've talked a lot about. We've discussed this at length, that Illinois is looking down the hole of the barrel of a $3.2 billion budget hole. I've talked to some people, just to clarify, I've talked to some people that thinks Pritzker's got some money under the couch cushions and some places he can squeeze that will make it not quite that bad. So let's see what he's able to talk about here in the next couple of weeks as he unveils his budget. But it is certainly a significant budget hole that we're facing. And the news that we want to share here is that in the last week, Pritzker's opened the door here to a tax increase. There was a quote early on, I think it was late last week maybe, where he talked about, the last place we want to go, we don't want to go to tax increases, we don't want taxes. And then just a few days later, he was like, well, I wasn't saying no taxes. I was just saying that's the last place we'd want to go is taxes. Which kudos to Rich Miller for following up and getting that quote. Again, I want to be trying to be positive this year and give kudos where they're due, even if it's people that aren't always our friends. And I want to say Jim Day nailed this in the News Gazette. What he said, I'll read it. That stance sets the stage for some tax-style kabuki theater in Springfield this summer, with Pritzker proposing no new taxes, while legislators decry the lack of revenue and ultimately cajole a seemingly reluctant governor to accept those tax increases. So, which I think is exactly what's going on here. Pritzker wants to set himself up as, I never wanted tax hikes. But you know what? Okay, fine. Democrats in Springfield Springfield. You guys want them. I'll sign them for you. So it's all just a bunch of theater going on here. But kudos to the House Republicans, especially. They've put out a graphic about this. A number of them have pushed it out. I first saw it on David Freese's Facebook pushing this out, but I know a number of them have pushed this out, pushing back and pointing out the fact that Pritzker is already talking about out both sides of his mouth. So let's see where this goes, but it's highly likely we're going to be looking at tax hikes here because I don't know how else you're going to fill this massive of a budget hole. Because remember, this is not a one-time budget hole. This has been projected to be even bigger next year and even bigger the year after that and the year after that. So you can't just have a one-time cut or a one-time source of revenue to fill this. You're going to have to find long-term cuts or long-term revenues, and the Democratic Party in the state ain't going to do much cutting.
I'd agree. I'd agree with the sources that Collins talked about right there. I don't think we're going to start at $3.2 billion deficit here. We might be able to cut a few $100 million from that, maybe cut that in half, but we're going to be talking about $1 billion plus deficit going into the next fiscal year. And what I'm really interested to see how it plays out is whether or not the Democrats actually let the Republicans into the negotiating room this time around. Historically, they haven't done that. I mean, the House was shut out the entire budget process last year, by my recollection, and the Republicans really haven't had a say in a budget in a long time in the state. So then again, the last time they did it was 2.5 years. We didn't have a budget. That's besides the point, of course. I'm interested to see if that happens because I do think that you need to hear the fiscal responsibility side of all this from the Republican Party, even if you're not going to give the Republican Party everything they want. And Lord knows you probably shouldn't if you're the Democratic Party in power in the state. But I think if you at least open the door to negotiations and hear some ideas from the other side, there could be some unique opportunities to decrease the budget deficit, reach that balanced budget standpoint, even if you don't listen to everything. Even if you only take a good idea here, a good idea there, we might be able to move in a positive direction in terms of this state's budget. Will that actually happen? To be seen. I think a lot of it relies on how much Pritzker actually wants to run for re-election. If he doesn't want to run for re-election as governor, he might just scotch tape together a budget, say he won today, have the House pass it, have the House and Senate pass it, and then move on to run for some other office. If he does plan on running for re-election, he might need to make this a more negotiable budget to satisfy himself for a next year, for a year after that budget, because that's where the political calculus is going to come into this thing.
Well, Dan, how likely is it? I mean, how much have you seen Democrats actually want to play with Republicans on this stuff?
No, this is nonsense. First of all, the budget is probably mostly crafted. They started working on this, but remember, this is a $53 billion budget, and you don't. And Zach, your budget in your company, you don't start in March. You don't start in February to do your budget. This has been worked on behind closed doors. The inviting the Republicans in, it hasn't happened for years. They don't care. I said this last year, and I may have said it when we were at the state fair when I was on with you guys. There is only one place left for the Democrats to raise money, and that's the income tax. Pritzker tried it. He wanted a graduated income tax, and we beat him back. And we beat him back because of the retirement income. Every retiree in Illinois knows that if we get away from a flat tax, the retirees in this state are going to be taxed. Might only be 0.5% or 1% the first time around, then it's 2%, then it's 4%. But people understand that once we get away from a flat tax, the retirement income in this state will go away. Tax-free will go away. And people will flee this state faster than they've ever fled. So, but that's the only place there is. I jokingly told Cam Butler about 2 months ago that if he wanted me to vote for an income tax increase, for an increase in the income tax, he could do it. I would consider doing it for one and one purpose only. You put on a Fair Maps constitutional amendment on the ballot in 2026. Guarantee me that constitutional amendment will be on the ballot. We don't get this bullshit, we don't get this stuff going to the Supreme Court saying that this and that and the other like the last 2 times. If you guarantee me that we're going to have a constitutional amendment for a fair map, a significant change in the way this state is drawn and run, I might make that concession.
Yeah.
Well, I was
Otherwise,
just, oh, sorry, Dan.
no, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I'm old enough to remember, and I'm not very old, when the budget for the state of Illinois was $30 billion. So you
Yeah.
look at, we've almost doubled in the last 8 years or so, our state budget. And the Democrats have had opportunities to kind of right the ship, right? I mean, when Trump was president and the economy was firing on all cylinders pre-COVID, they talked about how we had more revenue than expected because the economy was so strong. They didn't take advantage of that opportunity. They just increased spending. Then during COVID and the Biden administration, we were getting all of this money from the federal government, these buyouts basically, and they could have used that to address some of the problems. But what did they do? They increased spending again. And then on top of that, you've got this immigration crisis where we're spending over $1 billion a year on people that aren't citizens of this country, and they don't have any interest in reeling that back in, and like we talked about earlier, they're not cooperating with ICE on deporting the ones that definitely shouldn't be here because they're criminals and causing serious problems across our state and making our communities less safe. So they've had plenty of opportunities. I don't have any empathy for these people, sympathy for these people that are in charge right now because it's a problem that they created.
Yeah.
And I think that, they could do some things on, reducing the tax burden in the state, because you look at the data from the federal level, you reduce taxes for people, they spend more, and at the end of the day, you end up having more revenue than what you were getting from the higher tax rate. That's proven. And deregulation would go a long way as well in increasing the revenue in this state, because businesses are going to turn around, spend, hire more people, produce more, maybe even, bring factories to this state. I mean, there's a lot of opportunities out there to fix this problem, but they're not going to do it.
Yeah, no business would come here anymore. My business has been here for over 100 years, and if I had it to do over again, I wouldn't be here. And if I could afford to leave, I would. It's ridiculous. And the numbers show it, right? People are fleeing, the businesses are fleeing, the jobs are fleeing. It's a downward spiral, and I don't understand why they don't get it. It's basic, but yeah. And you know what? The thing of it is we all know there's more coming, right? There's never going to be enough revenue for the state. They have a spending problem, not a revenue problem. They can't get it under control. The pension problem is disgusting. And so no matter what they raise the taxes now, there's going to be more. So any individual, any business would be well advised not to come here because they're coming for you next.
Yeah. So here's a thought, and I'll put this in the Democrats' head. If you earned a public pension in Illinois and you don't live here anymore, I'd tax them. You took our money, you took our tax money, and you fled with it. Tax them 4.95%. If you don't live here, if you're not domiciled in Illinois and you're getting a public pension from a government in Illinois, tax them.
Look at that. Republican comes to the Democrats with a revenue enhancing idea. This is revolutionary. I like it.
Well, but then what will all the retired state reps and state senators on the Democrat side do? Like Gary Forby, lives in Florida. He'd have a hard time.
Well, to our friend Patrick Finkson in the Illinois talked about the legislators who are going to struggle with this. He got a couple quotes worth sharing because he talked to a progressive lawmaker who said Democrats were elected to advance a progressive agenda, not to make draconian Rauner and Trump cuts. So you've got a significant portion of the Democratic lawmaker group who certainly is not going to agree with any sort of cuts. But then you've got the moderates who he got a quote from a moderate lawmaker who said, if we saw anything in November, it's that voters aren't happy with the status quo. I think we need to get the message out, or get the message that more taxes are not the answer. So even the caucus, the Democratic caucus, is going to really struggle with this, and we saw that last year. So this is going to be a big fight. And Michael, I mean, I think we've all made this point, certainly at different times. Democrats created the mess, so I'm not overly interested in helping them solve the problem. If they actually care enough to work with Republicans, as Chris said, fine, let's do it. But if they just want to use us as cover because they screwed up and now they need us to bail them out, no, you made the bed. It's time to lay in it.
Been there, done that. Mike Madigan came to the Republican caucus when they wanted to raise taxes and told Jim Durkin, I want 15 votes on this bill, or we're going to go, nuclear on the industry in the state. And so Durkin went to all the leaders and a few other people. I was one of them. Fortunately, I was able to resist the temptation. It wasn't a temptation. It was a lot of pressure. And what did we get? A press release, bipartisan tax increase. And what does that do? Who's going to vote for a bipartisan Republican? That's just a load of horse hockey.
Yeah, well, Jim Durkin wasn't a great Republican either. And he took plenty of money from the unions and everything else, and now he's got his little gig going on there with the transportation authority. I mean, you know what I'm saying. I put him in the Rhino camp and just as bad as the Democrats, and that's a problem we have in Illinois. A little bit too much of that, right? There's been a lot of good Republicans, yourself included, but some of them might as well have just one party.
Well, we're going to see
in the sense that we just let them blow it up here. I hate to see it because I love this area. I love Chicago, but let's go to Detroit. Let's just bankrupt the thing. Let them have it. Just do it. And these pensions are going to get blown up in the end anyway. It's terrible, terrible.
Well, let's go on to some of that fight. Let's move on to this next topic here because we're seeing some fight, and I want to give kudos where it's due. I mean, the Republicans are starting to show a little more of a backbone than I've seen in a pretty long time. As a matter of fact, over the last week or 2 weeks or so, you've seen, and I've seen across the board, a lot of these Republican representatives and senators in Illinois have started to be a lot more vocal. The House Republican organization, the Senate Republican organization has been a lot more vocal and going after Pritzker, going after the Democrats, and highlighting the problems that they've created. It's a fight and it's a backbone that I haven't seen in a long time. And I want to give them genuine credit because I think they've really upped their game. And we'll talk about that even more in our next topic. But Democrats aren't happy about that. They're not happy about Republicans speaking out and showing any sort of a backbone. So they decided this week to try to come after them. They filed a number of resolutions to try to jam the Republicans up and get them on the record on super controversial national topics. So the first one was to condemn Trump for January 6th and how criminals attacked police officers. Then there was another resolution condemning Trump for his cruel and lawless efforts to block life-saving services. And then another one calls on Trump to stop his actions that are making communities less safe. And raising the cost of living. And then another one on Trump undermining equal pay. And then another one to call on him to abandon his reckless tariffs plan. It was all retribution for the Republicans to make them look good. And kudos to the Republicans who said, screw this. They walked out the door and said, let's hold a press conference. Because here's the thing they understood. And I've been saying this for a long time, and the Republicans have struggled with this. Democrats are going to attack you whether you agree with them or you don't agree with them. When you get a Republican who says, I'm 99% pro-choice, guess what? Personal PAC and the Democrats are going to attack you in your next election because of that 1% that you weren't pro-choice, and they're going to lump you in with everybody else. They're going to say you want to throw women in jail. They're going to treat you just as if you were 100% pro-life. Same thing here. The Democrats are going to attack Republicans for January 6th and for Trump, whether they stay in the room and vote against or for these resolutions or not. These mailers are already written. These talking points are already written. They attacked every Republican in a targeted race in 2024 for January 6th, whether they had spoken out about Jan 6 or not. I mean, heck, they went after Brandon Schweizer, ex-military, and called him unpatriotic. And I mean, he got real angry about it, and it's part of why he kicked butt in his race, so I'm glad for it. But Democrats are going to attack you for this no matter what. So the Republicans had the right play, walked out the room, held a press conference, used some really strong language to say, forget this. You want to play partisan games. We're not in for it. I mean, Ichiro's quote on this was great. When House Democrats want to get serious about the real issues facing Illinois, instead of political grandstanding on the taxpayers' dime, let us know. We're ready to do the work. And you had a number of other Republicans. Jennifer Sanalitro had a great quote that she put out. A few others did as well. Again, David Freese, another really good one. Even Gabby Shanahan, a candidate previously, not even a current official, she did a great quote, and she also said cost of living, which unfortunately Ichiro wasn't willing to use those words. They still talked about economic development or something like that. So kudos to Gabby for actually understanding good messaging. But it was a lot of fight from the Republicans. They stood together and fought on this, and I haven't seen this in a long time. So kudos where they're due. What do you guys think? For those of you who saw this go down.
I just love to see that picture of all of them there standing on the stairs during that press conference. I think it was great, especially considering what we've been through, the last 4 or 5 weeks with all the infighting. And hopefully it's a sign of what's to come. We can be more united on some of these things because the Democrats, the Democrats are in total disarray. I mean, you look at Brandon Johnson, JB Pritzker, Chris Welch, the mistakes that they're making, the comments that they're making. It doesn't there's a big opportunity here, and if we're united, we can take advantage of it. So
Yeah.
keep it up.
Well, that's what HRO in their initial statement, that's what they said under McCombie's statement. She said, today House Republicans stood together for working families across Illinois and against the petty political games of the majority party. That sentence is beautiful. I love it. Then she got into we're promoting economic growth, which, we're going to work on that language still. We still should be saying cost of living, but hey, I will take progress, and this is significant progress, and I'm going to give kudos where it's due.
Well, and look at the number. I mean, we've talked about it ad nauseum, right? But you look at the numbers from the November election. Trump got 45% of the vote in the state of Illinois. There's a lot of people, over 2.4 million people voted for him. That's more votes than Pritzker got in 2022, right? So there's a lot of people that disagree with the resolutions that the Democrats tried to put up this week. And people need to be made aware of that because you need to show if you support President Trump and his agenda and what he's doing in the White House, you have to get out and vote in that 2026 election because it's possible we can do something here. Because the Democrats are going to have a drop off in votes from the presidential. We just have to make sure that our drop off isn't as significant.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be more than just turnout, though. You're right. I mean, made this point a few times on episodes. Turnout is certainly going to be key, but there's a lot more that's going to go into it. And I think the more that we can do things like this, I mean, it's, kudos to one of our clients over the years has used that tagline, people over politics, and it polls extremely well. And that's what this is. I mean, the more you can use that kind of language, we've tested it in other states. We've tested it all throughout Illinois. That language is golden. And so the more you can say, listen, you're going to play your petty political games, and we're going to stand up for the working families of this state, the more we can have that kind of a contrast, we're going to be on the side of the majority for sure, especially in a blue collar state like Illinois that doesn't care about the petty politics. They just aren't interested in it. They want to know how you're going to make my life better. And if we can talk about how we're going to lower their costs, we're going to get them good paying jobs, we're going to put an end to all these political games. That's the kind of language they want to hear about.
And I think one of the other messages is what we've said for the last few years, it's the common sense, common sense solutions to problems. And when you are able to own that, when you can frame the discussion around what's really common sense, what's the other side going to do?
Yep.
What's the retort? Well, we want to do the things that aren't common sense, or I think if we can own that, and I agree with you on economic development. I mean, it's the cost of living, it's the terrible burden that it puts on families, and it's all man-made. Not all of it, but most of it is man-made, and we can unmake it. But
you're talking about, Dan, you're talking about wedge politics. Drive the wedge and put us on the side of the majority and them on the side of the minority. Democrats have been very, very good at this over the years, but they've been struggling on it recently. We just haven't taken advantage. When you can drive that wedge and put us on the side of the majority of the people, while Democrats hyper-focus on a tiny, tiny, tiny minority, a tiny sliver of our population, we shouldn't be running scared from the fact that we represent the majority of Americans. That's what our representative democracy is supposed to be, and yet somehow we've allowed the left to make us afraid to admit that we represent not just a slim majority, a significant majority. The working families, middle class families. Democrats have become the party of the rich and then just a small sliver of not the rich. And meanwhile, there's a wide group in the middle that are looking for help. Those working families who want help, and Republican policies can help them if we just start talking about it and showing them how we're actually standing for them. And that's wedge politics at its best, just like you said, Dan.
Well, and let's take it back to this budget deal. People in this country, and I've got to believe Illinois is no exception, they applaud what's going on when they see where this money is going in DC with USAID. They see all of this money that's spent all over the world when we're not taking care of our own people here. I think if the Republicans can use that same logic, that same narrative, we tried. Remember, Andrew Andrzejewski wanted, a forensic audit.
Rest in peace.
Rest in peace, Andrew. But he wanted a forensic audit years ago to see where our money is. And we get into this budget fight, I think we can leverage the goodwill that Trump has gotten and with this fight to eliminate waste and all of this wasteful spending. If it's happening in DC, it's happening in Illinois.
Well, and Dan,
Let's get good.
you should host your own podcast because that's a perfect segue into our next topic, which is, we may not be able to talk about the national dollars that are wasted in Illinois, though we should be talking about it just in general. But for us, where's that money being wasted? It's on non-citizens. And the Senate Republicans have been talking about that for well over a year. And again, kudos to where it's due. They've done a really good job, especially lately. They've really upped their game. I saw some stuff by Jill Tracy and a few others with really strong language on this week and did a great job. And now HRO and the House Republicans are jumping on board too. HRO put some stuff out this past week. Joe Sosnowski in the House put some things out, as did a few other House Republican members. And then last week you saw them try to tie Democrats to Brandon Johnson in Chicago and how it's a sanctuary city and he was refusing to testify. Those press releases were a little clunky, but you know what? They were trying. And they were actually trying to tie those Democrats like Murray Breuil and some of the others in vulnerable districts to Brandon Johnson and to money wasted on citizens. I applaud the effort, even though it wasn't necessarily done as effectively as it could have been. But I don't care; it was effort, and you're seeing this movement. I want to give kudos again where it's due. The Republicans in both the House and the Senate, especially these last couple of weeks, have really upped their game. And as you said, Dan, when we can highlight where tax dollars are being wasted and not being spent on our working families, our small businesses, our family farmers, our family manufacturers, instead it's being wasted over $1 billion being wasted on non-citizens. That's our angle on this, and we've been using it to great effect. Every poll I've seen that tested this, it plays extremely well, not just with independent voters, in minority communities, especially Black communities. This plays incredibly well. This is a super strong message for us, and especially over the last couple of weeks, you've seen both caucuses do a really good job on this. So again, being more positive in 2025, and I wanted to point out some really good efforts here. To your point, Dan, I think the more we can show dollars being spent on non-citizens instead of our own people, the more that your independents, your swing voters are going to be like, yeah, no, I'm not on board with that. Just like nationally, they're not on board with millions of dollars being spent pushing a trans agenda in Saudi Arabia or wherever the heck it was being spent. The average person's like, okay, that's dumb. My tax dollars shouldn't go to that. Same thing here with those services to non-citizens. It's a great issue for us, and we're starting to use it pretty well. Is that it? Y'all just gonna let my rant hold? No one's got thoughts? We're not even in the section of the podcast yet. Come on.
Collin, I've learned a long time ago never to get in between you and a rant. So in the interest of my job, I'm going to stay silent on this matter. However, thinking about it now and how much I actually like this job, perhaps it would be a good idea for me to talk a little bit on this particular issue after your rant. No, I mean, seriously. I mean, I think, I know the House is really keen on taxes, and we might be seeing some tax increases here, but there is a nice way you might be able to play in the hyperfixation on taxes and is playing something good here. And that's, taxes are going up. Where's that money going? It's not going to working families. It's not going to help it's not going to help you buy groceries. No. In fact, it's going to all these non-citizens and undocumented immigrants so they can have a lower cost of living in the state. But you, the American taxpayer, well, you're going to have to front the bill for that sort of thing, despite how it might affect your family. I think there's messaging potential there. We're going to have to see how things play out a little bit. But again, it's just the Democrats being stubborn,
Well, Chris, it's the line you used, I think, is really good. The other line here is with CTU begging for more money, with Chicago begging for more money, any sort of a tax increase can be shown as a Chicago bailout, which isn't going to play in most of the state, whereas a CTU bailout, which based on the latest poll results, isn't going to play even in Chicago. So they have, by running their mouths, they have given us significant opportunities on the messaging side. We obviously have to take advantage, but you know what? Based on the growth I'm seeing in the communications and messaging skills from Republicans the last few weeks, I'm hopeful that we'll be able to take advantage of these opportunities being put in front of us.
Well, and I think this $1 billion that's being spent on non-citizens is probably just the tip of the iceberg, and that if somebody really dug and looked through some of the other expenditures that this state has done over the course of the last few years, I'm sure that it's right up there with the federal government and all the absurdities that we've been reading about this week, like $50 million worth of condoms being spent to Gaza. It's just absurd. And I think we need to be prepared as Republicans to highlight some of those things. So when Pritzker and the Democrats come and say, hey, we need more money, we need a tax increase, we can say, well, why don't you cut some of the items on this list? And maybe that'll get us a little closer to balanced.
Well, let's go to our last full topic on the agenda, which is Chicago based. So, as apparently written into his contract, Chris always gets to start on Chicago topics. So, Chris, we'll make you happy here, buddy. But a couple things to point out here. Brandon Johnson, I saw this on Facebook from a few people. The realtors have actually been sending mail against Brandon Johnson, calling him out for breaking his promise to not raise property taxes, which is pretty significant. The realtors have a pretty powerful political arm. And so even while taking that heat, Brandon Johnson came out in the last week and said, you know what? I'm still not done with Bring Chicago Home. We need to make sure that we still go through with this tax increase so we can help the homeless and bring Chicago home. So even as his favorabilities are in the tank, as he's taking heat for breaking his campaign promises and all sorts of other issues that he's running into. I mean, I guess kudos for just continuing to try to run through that brick wall. But apparently, Bring Chicago Home is going to come through yet again. He's going to give it another shot, Chris. So, what do you think?
What are we doing here, folks? Who's in charge over here? Who are the people in Brandon Johnson's office who aren't telling him, Brandon, we're at 14% approval ratings. What the hell are you doing, buddy? There's no adults in the room in the city of Chicago. You know what? Lori Lightfoot, things were bad. And we all said at the time how much worse things could get. And obviously, we're living in that right now. But even with Lori Lightfoot, there were people on Lori Lightfoot's staff who would say, hey, maybe that's a bad idea. And Lori would, tear them up if they told her that because she was stubborn. Rahm Emanuel would do the same thing. But there was always people in the city of Chicago who would be like, I don't know. Why don't we strategize a little bit on what we're going to make our next move? But now in the city of Chicago, it seems that without fail, everything Brandon Johnson does is the wrong idea. And it's impressive. I have never seen this many failures come from an elected official ever. Even Tiffany Henyard. We always like talking about Thornton. It's good copy. The press loves her. Tiffany Henyard, she does like some things. Like they shut down the bus program in Thornton, but they were doing some good things in Thornton Township, I guess. Maybe it was one or two of them, but not everything was a complete disaster over there. In the city of Chicago, it's just a revolving door of disaster after disaster. I can genuinely not remember the last time Brandon Johnson did something good in his administration. It might have been the police superintendent. That might have been the only good thing Brandon Johnson has ever done in this administration. Everything else has been nothing more than an absolute swing and a miss. I've said before to not underestimate a statewide increase in income tax, okay? Because that could come back. It could pass again. Don't get flat-footed on that if you caught flat-footed if you're a Republican or a conservative in the state. But I will tell you this right now. If you couldn't pass Bring Chicago Home in the city of Chicago in a primary cycle where your most partisan voters were going to show up, when are you going to pass it? What election cycle do you want to put this on the ballot? You are having 25 to 30% of the black vote no on this when you need 85 to 90% at least to vote for it in that demographic category. So whatever is happening on the fifth floor of the city of Chicago, I'm saying keep it coming. Because at this point, Brandon Johnson's going to get all of 2% in a re-election campaign, and we're just going to walk right into the mayoralship of Willie Wilson. And honestly, I'm on board for that at this point. Because you know what? If Chicago's going to go down to tubes, let's at least have a little bit of fun doing that. Yeah. So that's my spiel for today, everybody. The city of Chicago is a disaster. The mayor's an idiot. What else is new? More at 11.
Down to tubes. Hey, so Chris, at a certain point, don't you just start to be like, you know what, our instincts are so bad, let's figure out what we want to do and then just always do the opposite. Like at a certain point, you're like, that's how bad we are. Let's just reverse it and do the opposite of what our instincts say, and maybe we'll luck into not screwing something up for once. At a certain point, you just do that.
It's the George Costanza strategy. And if you're somebody on the fifth floor of the city of Chicago right now, I would implore you to please consider this. Please consider just for a week, maybe a day, maybe just a day. Think whatever you're doing at work and your superior tells you to do the opposite. And we'll see that approval rating tick up and up and up and up and up because the opposite of what Brandon Johnson's doing is literally always has been the right answer ever since he took the job. So yeah.
Anyone else want to dump on Chicago, or did Chris do a good enough job for all of us? All
I
right,
think
so
Chris did great.
All right, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to move to our section, the news you can use section. This is our quick hits. So, the whole point of this section is to equip you, our viewers, our listeners, with the things you should be aware of that you should be talking about, letting people know in your networks and your social media. If you're an organization or an elected official, you can use some of this in your fundraising, emails, social media, mail pieces, whatever it might be. This is all intended to be helpful info for you to highlight just how crazy the other side is. And so, I'm going to run through these. I'll pause after each and let our participants and guests that've got thoughts, they can feel free to jump in, but we'll go through these a little bit quickly. Again, the whole goal here is just to equip you. You may not be aware of all these things, and they're all usable for us to highlight just how nuts the left has gotten in Illinois. First things first, Barbara Hernandez is always good for at least one of these bills, and she did it again, House Bill 2367. So she's filed a bill that would make all prisoners in Illinois only have to serve 50% of their sentences. Right now, people like murderers serve 100%. Those who have serious felonies serve like 85%. Some serve 75, and those with lesser charges only serve 50. For her and her bill, if this were to pass, all of them would only serve 50. So essentially, you are saying, especially those murderers, let's give you half of the sentence that you currently have, let alone all these serious felonies where people are in prison. This is a ridiculous bill, which you can phrase any way you want because it's about as crazy as it gets. But it doesn't stop there. It also changes every instance of the words prisoner and inmate to incarcerated person. And so, we don't want to hurt their feelings. They have feelings as well, those murderers and people who have committed serious felonies like, rapes and pretty ridiculous things. They're not prisoners or inmates. They're just incarcerated people. Let's treat them with respect. Anybody else want to join in on the ridiculousness of that bill?
I think it just means that we're going to have to give maximum sentences to everybody. I mean, if that's what if that thing would ever see the light of day.
Yeah, I mean, certainly judges would have to overcompensate. That's for sure.
Go max. Okay, you get 100 years.
Right.
If you don't have your concealed carry permit yet, you better get one if this passes because it's bad.
Next crazy bill here is along the same lines here. So House Bill 0007, or just HB 7, was filed by a Chicago Democrat that would automatically expunge the records of convicted violent criminals. So anyone with a Class 3 or Class 4 felonies, they made a little bit of a carve out for domestic abuse. But otherwise, if you've got a Class 3 or a Class 4 felony in your record, this bill would automatically expunge your record for you. Now, what is a Class 3 felony? That includes aggravated battery, property theft more than $300, perjury, forgery, involuntary manslaughter, reckless homicide, aggravated stalking. All these would be automatically expunged from your record. Class 4 felonies are DUIs, retail theft up to $10,000, assault, stalking, first-time weapons offenses, criminal trespass. All this, again, would be expunged from your record. So doesn't take a communications expert to figure out a way to spin this, to talk about just how crazy the left is in Illinois, that a Chicago Democrat filed this bill so that if you are somebody who has isn't convicted for involuntary manslaughter or reckless homicide or a weapons offense or assault or a DUI, they want to wipe your slate clean so that nobody knows about it. Pretty sure the vast majority of swing voters in this state, let alone even soft Democrats, are not going to agree with that position.
Here's an easy way. Just change your name. We already allow them.
Well, there's that too, right? Yeah.
Just go change your name.
Well, a lot of people want to punch a Democrat in the face, so I guess you should. You'll have no problem, no repercussions. Why not?
This state's great if you're a criminal. You can go outside, go get drunk, get in your car, hit somebody with it, kill them, involuntary manslaughter, DUI. You can go to jail. But the great news is, if these bills pass, you only got to serve half your sentence. And then when you get out, your record's expunged. It's like going committing crimes in this state. It really is a victimless crime if you think about it, because it really seems like it never even happened before. I don't get it.
This is definitely if not one of the most pro-criminal states in the entire country.
Well, that's because of people running it.
Well, I guess
Well, they're criminals, right? So yeah.
with corruption running so rampant, you're not wrong. What is it? What's the latest study that came out that one elected official per week on average gets convicted in this state? So yeah, there you go. All right, let's go to the next one here. So, along the same lines, but on drugs now, a far left Democrat, Chris's favorite Democrat, Rachel Ventura, has filed Senate Bill 42, which would essentially stop law enforcement from being able to police drug DUI. So, here's where this came from. I'll give this really, really quickly. So, there's confusion because of the Supreme Court and how some of these laws have been understood, which is that if you pull somebody over and the police smell raw cannabis, they can actually search your car. But if they smell burnt cannabis, they can't because of the way that the law was written. So people like Scott Holland and Shaw Media actually have applauded this bill because what they want is they want one consistent standard. But of course, if you get anything out of Rachel Ventura, it's going to be a far, far, far left standard. And so the standard she has chosen to make the consistent one is that you can never search them at all for any cannabis. But what this essentially does then is that if police smell the burnt cannabis in your car, knowing that you have been smoking marijuana, they can't do anything about that. And there are laws, of course, for good reason, that keep people from driving high because it's got a lot of problems for everybody around you, just like driving drunk. But this law would make it difficult, if not impossible, for police to enforce those laws. So, yet again, the heavy hand of government trying to set one consistent rule, and of course, picking the absolute worst rule to set. So, in Illinois, they want to basically make it so you could drive high as much as you want. But hey, Rachel Ventura will be happy because then nobody will have a criminal record then.
This actually makes the scenario that I proposed after the last bill even better if you're the criminal, because I presented you go to the bar, you get drunk. How about you go and get stoned, and then you get in your car, you kill, you hit someone in your car, you kill them. They don't even they can't charge you. They pull you over. Hey, you hit that guy. Nah, man, you're smoking pot here. What are you gonna do about it, man? They can't do nothing about it. They can't. This is great. Hotheads everywhere are going to be marching through the streets in joy because of such legislation like this. It makes doing all these things high. Basically, you can't get convicted for them.
So again, gotta love Illinois. The other thing we like to do in Illinois is, of course, make sure we give the trial lawyers a handout every chance we get because they don't make enough money in the state. So the next handout to trial lawyers is over cyclists. So there's legislation, HB 2454. Hirschauer and Buckner have filed this that would amend the law so that anybody operating a bicycle is deemed to be an intended user. That phrase is really important here, intended user, because there was a Supreme Court case that essentially said that bicyclists are not intended users of every roadway. Because here's what happens. When you say that they're an intended user, what that means then is that if anybody rides their bike and if they have any sort of an issue on the roads, which are not intended actually for bicyclists, they're intended for cars, which can deal with minor problems in the roads. That's why when you have bicycle paths, they're actually to a different standard than roads because you've got much smaller wheels on those bicycles. And so you can't have as many impurities. But with this law in place, would it pass? Even I went on a blog or a Reddit for people who are cyclists, and even they were saying, okay, this is a little bit much because this would give anybody on a cyclist the ability to sue any municipality if they have any sort of problems riding down any street. This is a absolute panacea for trial lawyers. Of course, this is what I would expect out of Democrats in the state of Illinois, since trial lawyers are one of their biggest contributors. But even cyclists have said, this guy said, I'm a huge cyclist, but I can see the city's point of view on this as well, that this is going to be a bit much. So another giveaway to the trial lawyers in this state with ridiculous legislation.
Okay, we're going to do another scenario here. Let's say you go out, get stoned, but instead of getting in a car, you get on your bike, and then you hit a pebble in the road, fly off your bike, kill somebody. Well, now you're stoned, so they can't do anything about it because they can't, arrest you for stone DUI. And plus, now you get to sue the municipality for having that pebble in the road because you were on a bike. So instead of not going to jail at all, and even if you do, your record gets expunged, you actually get a cash payout in this scenario. So this is keep on coming, Colin. I can do this all day.
And also, doesn't this create like this weird dynamic where like cyclists have more rights than like drivers? Because if I hit a pothole or something in my car and it causes a problem, the city has no liability for that. But if I hit a pothole with my bicycle and break my arm or something, well, it's the city's fault. So,
There's
Cash that
depending on where
check.
you are in the situation, there is some liability for that pothole. But I do get your point, Michael. And certainly, I mean, think about how expensive this is for cities. Now, every street's going to have to be to not just car code or automobile code, but now cyclist code. This is going to be a massive expense, either with litigation on the one side, or the road builders. I'm sure going to love this because they'll make a lot of money. It's ridiculous on its face. But I got to move on, so we're not here all day. All right, next one here. This one will be quick, but I'm sick and tired of seeing Democrats and Pritzker constantly tout our credit upgrades in this state. You go on the State of Illinois right now website, and they talk about how we have an A rating, and it's all municipalities all have an A rating. It's a big deal, but it's a total lie. Our rating is either lowest or tied for lowest among every state in the country. Yes, there are variations on the A, like A minus, A plus, double A, triple A, with minuses and pluses and Bs, and yeah, it gets kind of complicated. But their messaging people are really damn good in Pritzker's office. Just like every other state in the country, we have an A rating now, and Pritzker likes to point to these 9 credit upgrades, but no one ever asked the follow-up question. Okay, where does that put you in compared to the rest of the country? Everybody's been getting credit upgrade. We're still at the very, 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 very bottom. And so anytime you hear Pritzker or a Democrat claim that we've gotten all these credit upgrades and look, we've done such a good job managing the budget, make sure you point out that we still have the lowest credit rating in the entire nation. Don't let them own that space, because I've seen in polling in 2024, we saw in polling that Democrats have convinced voters in the state that they've done a good job managing finances because they constantly have the media backing them up and they put a lot of money behind. We've been so fiscally responsible. They always talk like Republicans, especially during campaign season. You've got to call them out on it. Don't let them own this space. So just a reminder, because I'm sick and tired of seeing Pritzker tout all of our credit upgrades and no media being like, yes, but we still have the lowest rating in the country. All right, going on to the next one. If you are living in the Chicagoland area and you are at all frustrated by the fact that the Kennedy construction, the I-90 construction, went way, way past how it was supposed to go, you need to make sure people are aware of why those delays happened. It's finally been unearthed that IDOT was lying. The truth is, why those delays happened, at least over a month's worth of those delays, is because Pritzker demanded that the reversibles be reopened and used as a private roadway for VIPs going to the Democratic National Convention to be able to go to and from the DNC. And so as a result, that led to, I think it was 32 days worth of delays on the project for this modernization of the Kennedy highway, or expressway. So if you are at all frustrated by all this construction I-990, or you represent voters in this region, you need to let them know that this is yet another situation of Pritzker and the Democrats giving special treatment to VIPs and the people that donate to them and support them at the expense of the working families, the people who had to sit in 2-hour long traffic to get into and out of the city for their jobs, or vice versa. They all had to deal with another 3 months of those construction delays, and those delays getting home or getting to their jobs because Pritzker wanted to give giveaways to his Democratic pals. That's something you absolutely need to be talking about, and kudos to Ben Bradley at WGN for unearthing this. All right, next. Few more here. If you live in Lake County, you need to be talking about this. Thanks to Dick Barr for shining a spotlight on this. Lake County is looking at raising the tax on development in the county. It's going to be on residential, it's going to be on commercial, and we're talking about a 20% increase. Also, they're tying that to inflation, so it will just keep going up every year with inflation. That's a $1,000 increase for some of these building permits. It's already one of the highest counties in cost. If you want to put up a shed, if you want to build a garage, you're already paying, I think Dick said $739. Yeah, I'm looking at it for a permit for that. And they want to make that even higher. And again, index to inflation. So this 20% increase is just going to keep going up. Democrats took control of the Lake County Board, and you are seeing that with their overspending and with their raising taxes. They're spending time like mandating that you got to use certain windows because they're special bird-proof windows, or burning, smoking in the forest preserves, or not letting you burn leaves. They're spending their time on that. Meanwhile, they can't focus on, maybe finding a way to be more fiscally responsible with your tax dollars. All right, we've got just a couple more here. It was a big week for news you can use. In in Chicago, Lane's going to bring up an image of this because it is just ridiculous. The city of Chicago, at a taxpayer-funded Chicago Cultural Center, has allowed an anti-Israel and anti-U.S. display to be up for a decent amount of time now. Lane will bring it up on screen. It's a ridiculous image. It uses words like children killers and murderers in talking about Uncle Sam and Benjamin Netanyahu. And the Dan Goldman of the Jewish United Fund says it conveys hatred of America, hatred of Israel, and hatred of Jews. And all 50th Ward Alderwoman Deborah Silverstein made a pretty good point. If this was a puppet depicting Mayor Johnson with blood on his hands, would this have been allowed to be showcased? Heck no. But of course, supporters of this, who are anti-Israel, came out and said art is not anti-Semitism, calling this art, which, you've seen it on screen. Lane has brought it up. Absolutely not art. And this devolved in the Chicago City Council. They had a special meeting about this. Alderman Byron Sigco Lopez from the Fifth Ward. I can never say that name. But he was screaming out, calling people white supremacists. It devolved and got crazy. Yet another situation where the city of Chicago is showing their principles here, and they are anti-Israel and anti-United States. Because the question is, whether or not you want to take it down, how in the hell was this allowed to be put up in the first place? That's really my question. You want to have a fight over whether or not it gets taken down. All right, fine. But how was this even allowed to be put up?
Well, and then we had, I think it was that in your region, Dan, or one of this, I think this city council member in Champaign, I believe, updated his profile picture to be a swastika, and then he tried to walk it back.
Yeah, that's gonna come up in our Clowns of the Week section, Michael. So hold that on for a second. All right, last one here for news you can use. This is just to prep our viewers, our listeners to be prepared. A big fight coming out of Washington, D.C. is going to be looking at public aid and means testing that public aid. And you already saw that the supporters, or the opponents to that, actually, the best way to word it, have already started pushing their talking points. You saw this down in Springfield this week. You've seen that these talking points are starting to be pushed, that the number of Illinoisans who are enrolled in these programs, who rely on these programs on public aid, and how many of them are in each of these representatives and senators' districts. They are already gearing up for this fight. And you see some of these quotes, some of these people saying, we are going to stand for those people who rely on these services. Rita Mayfield says, I don't believe we should drop one person. We've got to make sure they get their money. And this is what you've got to be prepared for. Democrats are going to try to claim that this means testing is kicking needy people off the program, but that's not actually the case. The expansion of Medicaid that happened expanded it to able-bodied adults under the age of 65, people who could get a job. That's who this expanded to, not to those people who really needed this, the people who couldn't get a job, single mothers, the people who can't work. That's not who this expansion added to the program. Democrats are going to try to claim that this is taking away their support. The people that we all agree, Republican, Democrat, people we all agree, those who need help, we want to help them. Means testing is, let's make sure those people who don't need this money aren't defrauding the government, so we can afford to help that single mother, so we can afford to help the people who need our support, who we all agree that we want to support. That's the point of means testing, because it has been proven they have found people who have won the lottery and yet still are accepting public aid because they weren't removed from the programs. They found people who had luxury cars in their driveways but were still taking public aid. There are plenty of people who are defrauding these systems, and the whole point of means testing is, let's stop them from defrauding these programs, because the programs are starting to go bankrupt, and we can't allow that to happen because people in need rely on these programs. So make sure you're ready to fight back, because I know through some of our clients and the work that they're doing, this fight's going to be a big fight in D.C. in the coming months and years. It's going to trickle down to states like Illinois. You already see them preparing for it. So you better make sure you're ready with your talking points on our side, because this is going to be a big fight that's coming. All right, that's enough. Let's close down. I have taken advantage of everybody's time enough, but we've equipped our audience, and I'm glad for that. As always, we end with some fun segments. So our OG and Clown of the Week, anybody that our guests, our participants want to put in OG, somebody who's done something great, mostly in politics, but some of us like to go outside of politics to like sports or something else. And then clown, somebody who has done something ridiculous that deserves a Clown of the Week nomination. There are no rules here, so just go say and do whatever you want. Have some fun with it.
I was going to say for OG of the week, I got to give a shout out to House Republicans because they really united this week, got some good press, and pushed back against Pritzker and Welch and the radical left Democrats, which is what we love to see.
Michael, I know you had a couple others, like you were happy with Doge uncovering the spending. You also liked the executive order protecting women's sports. You want to bring those up too?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm Doge, that's incredible what they've been able to unearth. I mean, you see the list online of, $50 million in condoms and $32,000 for a transgender comic book and, six figures on a transgender opera in Colombia. I mean, it's absolutely absurd. So I would definitely say Doge, OG of the week, and USAID Clown of the Week because the things they were spending money on were absolutely absurd.
All right, anybody else have thoughts?
How about we go with the Buffalo Bills? Got cheated out of another trip to the Super Bowl by the refs, and I think those people up there have conducted themselves very professionally. They've stayed out of the news. I think the NFL took a couple of those refs to the woodshed, but we don't see a lot of we don't see Josh Allen and crew crying in the press about how the game was officiated. They took it and they went home and they're preparing for the next season. So shout out to my Buffalo Bills.
Actually, I didn't notice that. I didn't, and actually, because I didn't notice it because they didn't do it. But the fact that they didn't complain, they didn't whine about it. I like that. That's I do like the Bills. I know my wife really wanted them to beat the Chiefs so that we didn't have to see the Chiefs in the Super Bowl yet again. So, all right, what else you guys got?
What about President Trump? Let's nominate him. He's doing some amazing things, right? I mean, between what he's doing on tariffs, his negotiating, and his willingness to just go at it and break the nonsense that's been going on. I mean, look, he's going to go even get us some land in the Middle East, a new resort town. It sounds like. I mean, this guy is willing to do whatever and rewrite the rules. You might shake your head to it, but it's bold, it's brash, and hey, it puts America first. That's what I voted for.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it hasn't been boring, and the whole shock and awe strategy, that's been their plan, and it's left the media and Democrats just scrambling, trying to figure out what the heck to do. So, if anything, it's given future Republican presidents a playbook for how to handle the first 100 days.
That's right. They don't even know where to begin. The other side, they're scrambling. It's great. Keep them off balance.
I don't know, Zach. I'm tired of winning already. I mean,
Amen.
He told us. He said you're going to get tired of winning.
My clown of the week was going to be Alderman Byron Sigcho Lopez, because I don't really want to get into the nitty gritty of like the art display or anything like that. I just want to say, if you're trying to make a point about your side of the political issue, like you really shouldn't just be calling everybody a white supremacist. Like this is what's wrong with our politics. We could have a reasonable debate over Israel and Palestine, whether or not the city of Chicago should do this, do that, whatever you want to do in the situation. But if you're on that side of the affair, and one of your loudest voices on the Florida City Council calling everybody a white supremacist, you're not winning any hearts and minds. You're not doing that. So shout out to Byron Sigcho Lopez. You are the clown of the week for making your side look like idiots yet again.
There you go. I got an OG I'll toss in for now. Listen, I don't love how her family has run the Chicago Bears, but we're recording this on Thursday. The first lady of the NFL, Virginia McCaskey, has passed at 102 years old. Certainly got to give her an OG for just how long she's been around and how much she's meant to the NFL and to the Bears. So I'll stop there because I have a lot I could say about how the team has been run by the McCaskey family, but this is not the time for that. So I'll just say thoughts and prayers to her family on the loss of their matriarch, and certainly we appreciate what she's done and her family has done over the years.
It's the Staley Bears, actually.
There you go. I've got some clowns if y'all are good, if y'all have gotten through yours. And Chris, I promise it's fewer than last time. So I've JB Pritzker, of course, always have to do it. I don't know if you guys saw this, but when Pritzker was coming out to attack Trump because he wasn't happy that Trump blamed DEI for the midair crash at Reagan National Airport, here's a quote. This is literally JB Pritzker saying this. Times of tragedy should be focused on mourning the victims and getting answers to their loved ones. That's what Pritzker said. Now, this is the same JB Pritzker who, anytime there's any sort of, let's say, violence that occurs using a gun, he's quick to come out with gun control statements. And, anytime he can push his political agenda, he will happily do it. But in this time, he got in his high horse and said that we should only be mourning the victims. You shouldn't use a tragedy to talk politics. So for his yet again hypocrisy, JB Pritzker gets yet another Clown of the Week nomination for me. The same goes true for his hypocrisy in blocking those who were pardoned for their January 6th for January 6th from state jobs. Listen, I get it. He wanted to play this issue, get it in the news. It was probably a good political play for him, but I love what Jed Davis said. He said, I'm confused. I thought the Democrats were the party of redemption and second chances with the hashtag hypocrisy. So kudos to Jed Davis. I certainly agree that Democrats love to take one stance when it's convenient for them and then another stance when it's politically not convenient for them. So Pritzker gets the double nomination this week. Only a few more here. Jesse Waters on Fox News talking about how here's his quote: "What kind of husband goes grocery shopping with his wife? How tone deaf do you have to be to say something like that?" And then he doubled down later in the episode. So listen, I love grocery shopping, and my wife does an incredible amount of work for our family, raising my little cute two-toothed Teddy. And so if I can go out and get the groceries to save her from having to do it, I think a real man does that and supports his wife. So shut up, Jesse Waters. The Clown of the Week for you for sure. Next here, Michael already mentioned it. Davian Williams from Champaign County making his profile photo a swastika. And this was not a conservative who did this. He worked for the school district. He's left of center, but just an idiot for doing this. Kudos for Champaign Mayor, who I've worked with in the past, who came out with a hard statement against this. There's no excuse for that. Don't do that. Also, Clown of the Week, Brandon Johnson. He opened the gift closet so we could all finally see it, but you actually can't go in it. There's an online list you get to look at, and you can view a video feed, but you still, and the media still cannot, and the Inspector General still cannot go in to see what lavish gifts the city of Chicago and Brandon Johnson have been given. And so the most transparent government in the history of Chicago continues to prove just how untransparent they are. Al Green, my next one here from Texas, the Democrats, has already moved to impeach Donald Trump, and we are 2 weeks into Donald Trump's term. It's not about what he used for that impeachment. It's just that we are now in the era of government that it's just you're in office for 5 seconds and they're already trying to impeach you. This is where we are in our government, and it just drives me crazy. Final one here. And this is just to all the bureaucrats in government, especially in the state of Illinois, and all the politicians and even the media. It was announced in the last week that the state of Illinois, that taxpayers are going to lose 30, maybe even as much as $40 million when the U of I decided to pull their plug on their Discovery Partners Institute research hub at the South Loop site, which is now called the 78. And that was it. It was just, taxpayers are out 30, maybe $40 million, and that was it. We have gotten to this point that taxpayers losing 30 to $40 million on something that's never happened and never was going to happen gets barely a mention in the media. That no one's like, you know what? That's working families' tax dollars that just got pissed away. But we're like, whatever. What's the next story? So the fact that we have reached that stage to the media, to our elected officials and politicians, could you please start to have just a little bit more respect for the tax dollars of the people you claim to represent? With that, I'm done with my Clowns of the Week nominations. We always end with closing thoughts from our participants. So I'm looking at who's unmuted. Dan, you're the only one unmuted. So kick us off with your final thoughts.
Well, thanks again for having me. It's good. You mentioned several members of the Illinois Freedom Caucus today, and I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about their stand on the House floor again this week. The strong messages that they presented, trying their best to get the message out to the people of Illinois how bad things really are in the Democrat caucus and what's coming. So I want to give a shout out to my former House members. Keep it up. 2026 is coming.
Zach, I appreciate you coming, not only to educate us on tariffs, but to let me nerd out for a little bit on that. So your final thoughts as we close down the episode.
Yeah, no, I think we could do a whole episode on tariffs to really get into the details on it. Maybe 3 people would watch, but honestly, a lot of people should be watching because that's about how we're going to get America strong, healthy, and prosperous again. So for those of you that want to learn more, go check it out at prosperousamerica.org. Learn the facts on tariffs and learn how they're going to help America be a stronger, better place.
And you've got a lot of information on a number of topics on that website. Give it again so people are aware.
Prosperousamerica.org.
Yeah, great organization. Lots of helpful information on their website. All right, Michael, your final thoughts for the week.
Well, we're less than 8 weeks out from the municipal election, so identify those candidates. Make sure you have a plan to vote because the consolidated elections matter a heck of a lot more than some of those other races. So let's get it done.
All right. And Chris, you probably would agree with that. And also, maybe people should pay their fines with the State Board of Elections so they don't get kicked off the ballot like those people in Will County. Yeah.
Thank you for having me, Collin. I always look forward every week to joining you and my fellow guests on the Smoke Filled Room podcast. Gentlemen, it's been a very long week, and it's going to be an even longer weekend. So thank you all for tuning in this week. Thank you for having me on. It's always, just keep up the good work out there, guys. Keep knocking on those doors. Keep making those phone calls, and have a wonderful weekend.
And just for all those who are watching, Chris loves the fact that the refs keep helping out the Kansas City Chiefs because he's going to be cheering for the Chiefs in the Super Bowl on Sunday. So
That's
make
right.
sure to send him your letters and your notes. Chris likes it when people cheat.
That's right. That's right. I'm a smart man, Collin. What am I going to do? Bet the Eagles? What are you talking about here? I'm a man who likes making money. And
I'm going to bet the Zebras, and I'm going to come out ahead.
Oh, yeah. Is that what book are you using that you can bet the refs, man?
All right, let's close this down. Thank you to Lane Davis, our producer. Thank you, everybody, for being part of this. We will catch you next week in the Smoke-Filled Room, and I'm sure we're going to have a heck of a lot of crazy stuff to talk about. So don't miss it. We'll talk to you soon.